We look to the saints as being models and guides for us, and we want to imitate their holiness. As we read about the saints, we soon discover that it's quite difficult to find a single pattern of holiness, a single way of following Christ common to all. One thing that is striking about the saints is their diversity. We've got St. Thomas Aquinas. He's a towering intellectual. And then we have St. John Vianney, who barely made it through the seminary. There is St. Vincent de Paul, a saint in the city. And there's St. Anthony, who found holiness in the harshness and lowliness of the Egyptian desert. There is St. Bernard, kneeling on the hard stones of Clairvaux in penance for his sins. There is St. Hildegard of Bingen, singing and throwing flowers, madly in love with God. There is St. Peter, the down-to-earth and no-nonsense fisherman. There is St. Edith Stein, philosopher and martyr. There is St. Joan of Arc, who leading armies into war. And there's St. Francis of Assisi, the pacifist who would never hurt an animal. There's the bad-tempered St. Jerome, who translated the Bible. And there's St. Philip Neri, whose spirituality was based on laughter. So how do you explain this diversity? And think of it like this. God is an artist, and artists love to change their styles. And the saints are God's masterpieces, and God never tires of painting them in different colors, different styles, and in different circumstances. So what does this mean for us? It means that we shouldn't try to imitate any one saint exactly. We need to look at them all to study their unique holiness, but then find that specific color God has intended for our lives, for our holiness. St. Catherine of Siena described it like this: be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. The title saints was used in the early church to describe those called and in covenant with God through Christ. And we have been called to holiness by God, and we are given the gifts that we need to live holy, sainted lives. Now, if there's one book in the Bible that even regular readers of scriptures tend to avoid, it is the book of Revelation. Some say, it's bizarre. Who can understand those extraordinary images and strange creatures? Well, today we have a reading from Revelation that has strange details that could confuse our modern need for literal exactness. We read how they who have come out of the great tribulation have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So when we think about this with this literal exactness, we ask, how could those wearing robes get them white by washing them in the blood of the Lamb? Wouldn't that turn them red? And the important point that I want to make today is that we mustn't reflect on this reading as someone familiar with science technology. Instead, we should reflect on it with a background of poetry and literature and imagination. The book of Revelation is apocalyptic literature, and it has more in common with poetry and has got nothing to do with science. Towards the end of the first century, Christians were under severe persecution from the Emperor Domitian of the Roman Empire. And they were tempted to feel abandoned by God. And in a very poetic style, the writer of the book of Revelation tells them, most definitely not. You are not abandoned by God. And he gives visions which promise future glory for those who remain faithful to the Lamb of God. And of course, the Lamb of God is Jesus. Glory isn't only a future reward, but even now we share in God's holiness through Jesus Christ. And that's why we who are gathered for Mass today and prayer today can also be called saints, because we hold dear and we are valued and feel precious by God. God really values us. And when we were baptized, a white robe was placed on us, and our baptismal robes are made white by the life force of Jesus, his blood at work in our lives. Once a catechism teacher asked her grade 3 class, "What is a saint?" And a little girl probably remembering the colorful stained glass images in a parish church responded, "Saints are the people the light shines through." And even now, as we look at our stained glass windows, we can see St. Paul of the Cross and Angela Merici over on the side there, amongst others. And so they are the big or public lights up in the church windows, and their light shines through in a rainbow of colors. Each saint shines in their unique light in one or many of the dark places of the world. And because their light has been so brilliant, we raise them up for all to see, so the rest of us can be enlightened and can have hope. If God could shine light through Mary and Joseph and St. Francis of Assisi and Clare and Catherine of Siena and Oscar Romero, then God can do that through us as well. And God can keep us strong in times of trials and doubts, courageous when challenged, compassionate to the broken, wise for those who are searching, outspoken when others are in a fearful silence, anonymous in performing loving deeds, persevering when struggles will not just evaporate, defending justice when the world ignores or presses down those who are marginalized, gentle and strong in the face of what takes us away from encountering God. This is just a small and an incomplete list of saintly virtues, but they come from reflecting on the lives of some of our favorite saints, like the ones I named. The ones I named are giants in the communion of saints, but it's also good to reflect on the lesser-known saints that we've all known and loved and encountered in our lives. Ordinary people whose lives we can recognize the holiness in it. And they remind us what is possible in our regular and ordinary lives. I'm sure we've all got our favorite saints. I'm sure we're all able to draw up our own list of the virtues that make a saint. And when you make this list, that's when we find it parallels what Jesus listed in today's gospel, the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes aren't a list of commandments we have to live by if we want to follow Jesus. Instead, they show how we can live when the source of our life is Jesus. Because of Jesus, we are blessed, and our lives reflect a profound change in us, which is the result of his grace. And this enables us to be poor in spirit, gentle and merciful, and peacemakers, and so on. In the second reading from the letter of St. John, John puts it another way. He says, "We are God's children now." And this feast, the Feast of All Saints, is about now. It's about our union with one another and the great cloud of witnesses who have preceded us. Today's feast reminds us of those who are now gazing on God's brilliance, and that we are in communion with them through our prayers and through our memory. And because of their lives, we can have hope for our own. There someday, We'll be able to meet all the stained glass saints that we see around in the flesh. And we're also going to meet all the others, the no less holy saints, the great multitude which no one can count. And so we remember today that we are already the saints of God, not because we have earned a great reward or gone through life unblemished by sin, but because of the mercy of God shown in Jesus. And so salvation comes from our God, who is seated on the throne, and from the Lamb of God.